Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to this panel on peacemaking and civility. My name is Elyse Slabaugh. I'll be moderating, and I'm really excited about the panelists that we have with us here today. I'll just briefly introduce them and then give the time over to them, and then we'll have hopefully some time for Q&A at the end. So we have with us President Bonnie Cordon, who's the current president of Southern Virginia University. And then we have James Lambert, the provost at SVU, and Jeremiah John, a political science professor at SVU, and Deidra Dryden, the vice president of development at SVU. So we're really excited to hear what they have to say, and I'll give the time over to President Cordon, I believe, first.
Well, it is truly remarkable to be with all of you, and I look out and I see friends. Old ones and new ones. As they ended, they said, give something hopeful. And I thought, this is hope. As we come here together, we're going to see a lot of hope. And so this is going to be interactive. We're going to give you some thoughts, insights, and then we hope that then we can have a discussion and questions, and we can have a dialogue on what you're seeing also. But before we get really into it, I want to thank BYU Law School and the Wheatley Institute for allowing us to be part of this wonderful event and this symposium. We are passionate, truly passionate about adding our voice to religious freedom and listening to your dedicated voices as you express what you're seeing out there in religious freedom and peacemaking. So if it was not for religious freedom, Southern Virginia University would not exist. And so you can see why we're extremely passionate. As many of you know, we're a faith-based university based on the restored gospel of Jesus Christ as its center. And so we educate by study and by faith. And by linking those two things together, we find that it is an incredible, powerful tool to move the rising generation forward. So I want to give you a glimpse of the rising generation, or just a few of our students. They are remarkable souls. Now, I've only been in the post for about 7 months, but what I have found is we have a people that will change the world, and they're walking on university campuses. Now, how we're going to change the world depends on their ability to connect and to make a difference. Now, these are just a few of our students, but if you could sit knee to knee with them, you would find that they have a desire to lend their voice. So I ask, with our time together, we want to discuss how we can engage, enlighten, and empower more of the rising generation in the cause of religious freedom through the power of peacemaking and civility. So how do we engage their participation? How do we build confidence, strengthen their ability for a dignified dialogue and mutual respect in the rising generation? Well, interesting, I have really pondered, what does history look like? And you'll note that we have relied heavily on the rising generation throughout history. Now let's just do a quick glimpse of just 3 personalities in history. So in 1776, what was going on? Well, all of us have our flag out on July 4th, but I found it fascinating that Alexander Hamilton at age 21 was the captain of the artillery and on the rise to be the aide of the camp for General George Washington. He was 21 years old. We call him a founding father, yet he wasn't even a father yet. James Madison played an important role at drafting the Virginia Constitution, including, note this, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which later directly influenced the formation of the United States Bill of Rights. Remarkable. And Thomas Jefferson, age 33, drafted the Declaration of Independence. So as we look at this, it's fascinating how we have leaned on the minds of the rising generation. Now let's just look at another moment in history. On April 6, 1830, with the development of freedom and religion, at the first official meeting for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, 6 men were on the rolls. as the first members of record and the first leaders of the church. What was the average age? Just 24 years old. Some of them at the tender age of 20. But yet the impact, you can see that we have leaned on them. So where's our rising generation today? And where's our lean on them? You know, it's interesting, and I've told young people, the rising generation, many times, I've said, you know, you are not the future leaders. Their eyes get big like, wow, it's a little insulting. And I say, because you are leaders now, and you will continue to be leaders. But do our rising generation really see themselves as leaders? Do they see, or are they equipped to really be able to be in the peacemaking, in the space where we need them to be part of the dialogue? I wanted to put this in twice. And the reason why is because these are the young people that we really do need to step into the space that will make and change the world for good, that will continue helping our democracy move forward. And President Nelson, who is the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he said an interesting thing that I have just, it's been seared into my soul. He said he was speaking to a youth devotional that was worldwide, and this was back in 2018, and he said, "My beloved younger brothers and sisters, you are among the best the Lord has ever sent to this world." And then he went on and said, you have the capacity to be smarter and wiser and have more impact on the world than any previous generation. Now, note, he did not say that that they are smarter, that they are wiser, or that they will have more impact. But that's powerful word of capacity. He said you will have the capacity. So what can we collectively, each one of us that are sitting in this room, what could we do to increase the capacity of our young people to be smarter and wiser and have more impact on the world than any previous generation? So I hope you think about that, because this will be part of our discussion. So that's what he said. You have the capacity to be what? Smarter, wiser, and have more impact. Now you think of the impact that the Founding Fathers had. He said that we will have more impact, that these rising generation will have more impact. So then we move forward with President Nelson, who gave a talk about peacemaking. How are we going to have impact? How are we going to change the world? And I think this gives us some real insights. Brothers and sisters, we can literally change the world. And then what does he say? One person and one interaction at a time. And then he asked the question, how? By modeling how to manage honest differences of opinion and mutual respects and dignified dialogue. Do you notice here he says, by managing? That's an interesting. How do we manage our emotions and what we're feeling about our cause? How do we, as peacemakers, walk into a room with all of the righteous indignation, but yet manage so that we can have a civil conversation and listen to learn? The rising generation, and so as we think about this, if the rising generation is the key for the future, what are we doing to help them move this forward? At Southern Virginia University, we are striving to provide a place and a space for these young people to truly master the art of peacemaking. Yes, these young adults will change the world for good, one person at a time. So I would like to introduce Dr. James Lambert, the provost of Southern Virginia University, and he will give us a glimpse and some insights of what we're doing at the university to help these young people to become.
Thank you, President Cordon. It's an honor to work with President Cordon, and especially an honor to ideate alongside her. And I want to talk about some of the things we've done in the last few months. I appreciate the charge by President Nelson and the two parts. The part that he gave to youth in 2018 and to the worldwide church and all membership, I guess to the whole world, in 2023. I think that sequence is important because he said you will have the capacity to have more impact on the world, and then how? You can change the world, one person and one interaction at a time. by learning to manage honest differences with, I've got to remember it, dignified dialogue and mutual respect. That's something I've seared into my brain. I want to focus on a few key words on how we manage to do that. How do we manage honest differences of opinion with mutual respect and dignified dialogue at Southern Virginia University? We're a school of about 1,000 students. So we have the opportunity to meet with them often and one person at a time and one interaction at a time. But let me start by talking about the rising generation a little bit. And I am not as much a stats guy as Ryan Burge. I'm going to do my best, but man, I was just floored by this. So let's see what we can come up with. Just recently, and this is kind of a fun slide to look at, although it's a kind of a doomsdayer slide, much like we just saw. But one of the things we noticed is the rising generation. I wanted to separate older Gen Zs and younger Gen Zs. Younger Gen Zs are thought of as 13 to 17. Older Gen Zs are 18 to 25. You can think of them as youth and young adults, but I'll use the industry terms. So I'm looking at the differences between the older and the younger Gen Zs. Right at that change from the older to younger Gen Z is about when they enter college. And so this is a crucial time. There's a lot you can see in that slide, and I'd love to just have it stay put. But you can make all kinds of deductions, but I'm only interested in some larger trends that may confirm some popular observations. Younger Gen Z individuals are more religious, or at least have increased levels of religiosity than older Gen Z individuals. This could be generational replacement, or it could be part of a process of broad decline, and we saw both in the last presentation by Ryan Burge. But the reverse trend tends to happen for civic and political engagement. Most metrics show that voting, political, and civic engagement increases during the ages of 18 to 25. So to quickly summarize, and this is non-scientific but philosophical and more deeply motivational, college students are more likely to decrease in religiosity and increase in political and civic engagement. So what does it look like? So how do they leave with that positive peacemaking power? Is this what the rising generation is experiencing? Is it a form of growing civic religion? To think about Durkheim and the idea of civic religion, I can imagine all sorts of questions or deductions that might arise with thinking about religiosity and the politics of the rising generation. And in fact, we're getting a fascinating and perhaps depressing or alarming review of this playing out in public, as you see protests and demonstrations that are ostensibly about politics and nation, Israel and Palestine, but are cloaked in religious language and implication, Jewish, Muslim. How are those arguments going? Have they demonstrated a capacity to be smarter and wiser with a real impact on the world? Are they peacemakers? I would argue that this is the result of not modeling dignified dialogue and mutual respect. So, how do we think about being smarter and wiser? And how do we think about honest differences of opinion? What does it mean to have honest differences of opinion? What is honest differences as opposed to just differences? The phrase that President Nelson uses is important to how we understand dignified dialogue and mutual respect. Honest differences is a recognition of the powerful value of pluralism. In my formulation, let's think of it this way. Pluralism is not difference for difference's sake, definitely not indifference to other religions, ideologies, and ethnicities and identities. That's closer to apathy. Or as Jonathan Rauch defined in 2003, a disinclination to care that much about one's own religion, or even in stronger disinclination to care about others. That's a problem, as we just saw. This to me is the opposite of true religious freedom. This is the casual attitude of indifference towards others, and it is what causes a civic religion to override a faith religion. Apatheism, the live and let live without intent, damages religious freedom and creates dishonest differences of opinion. Pluralism is the active engagement of other religions and ideologies to live according to the dictates of their creed and conscience. Honest differences of opinion come from honest acknowledgement of other opinions, ideas, and worship practices, which stems from pluralism. So at our young school of about 1,000 students, where we value the one person and one interaction at a time model, We believe in religious pluralism as not only a principle, but as a modus operandi. Although our current student population is just over 80% LDS, we proudly have self-identified and active Methodists, Episcopalians, Baptists, Buddhists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Muslims, Hindus, and Catholics. In our student satisfaction surveys, the two main reasons that students give for attending SVU are a Christ-centered environment and the feeling of unity on campus. I might argue that those two are not the same, but it would suggest that a kind of pluralism in action is a mark of peacemaking and unity rather than the other way around, and my colleague Jeremiah John will talk about that. That's census in student culture. Although diversity and pluralism are welcome, they do not automatically imply peacemaking or honest differences as opposed to just differences. That's where curriculum and intentional programming come in. A year ago, we began taking a close look at our core curriculum, or the general education requirements that all students must take. We wondered if it was unified, purposeful, and useful. We wondered if we were truly preparing students to learn and think in a way that would make the world better, was Christ-centered, and that was about our identity as a university. As we researched this, we went back to what we considered the greatest instruction of curricular guidance that the Lord gave in a revelation to Joseph Smith in Doctrine and Covenants 88. In December of 1832, Joseph Smith received a revelation from the Lord after there had been some serious disputation in Kirkland. I don't know of anything other than serious disputation in Kirkland, but he's always dealing with that. In that revelation, recorded in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord directs Joseph to set up a school and says pointedly, and I think these words, we all know them if we attend BYU, but revisiting them often is really important. Seek diligently and teach one another words of wisdom. Yea, seek ye out the best books, words of wisdom. Seek learning, even by study, and also by faith. And then later, appoint yourselves a teacher, and let not all be spokesmen at once, but let one speak at a time, and let all listen unto his sayings, that when all have spoken, that all may be edified of all, and that every man may have equal privilege. This is religious freedom. This is pluralism. We took those curricular and pedagogical instructions seriously, and as we began to reshape our core curriculum, we did it accordingly. We ultimately fashioned a core statement that would be our curricular mission statement, which looks a little like this, and I'm not going to read everything in there. We love one another, we seek wisdom, and we teach one another. And you can see in some of the subsets there, we're thinking about others' words, we're listening to them, we have orderly discussions, and we're still in the process of rewriting this core curriculum. We are in the process now. Currently, it's being closely scrutinized by faculty, so you can imagine the wonderfully pleasant, peaceful, and definitely not contentious process that is a part of. But even as we were confident about what this may be, there seemed to be an element missing, and this is what I want to highlight. In preparation for this talk, I began to see what really matters here. When Joseph Smith handed this revelation to William W. Phelps in January of 1833, he called the revelation the olive leaf and described it as a message of peace for the quarreling saints in Missouri. The revelation on education has since been popularly referred to as the olive leaf around the church. So the Lord's pedagogical and curricular charge was recognized by Joseph Smith as the peacemaking salve for what some may call honest differences of opinion. The Lord's curriculum, the olive leaf, loving one another, seeking wisdom, and teaching one another in an educational setting. With this knowledge, we started to build up a core that reflects not only our strengths, but this civil and peacemaking possibility. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see where we're going here, and it culminates in a class that I want to talk about very briefly before I move on. This is a draft of our revamp. I plead with you not to release it to the public or to students because, like I said, our faculty is non-contentiously going over it. However, a few things to notice as this slide is up. We believe that the baseline courses will allow us a knowledge and skill that can create honest out of honest differences. That knowledge, thinking, and learning that is our core curriculum based on the olive leaf by study and faith will culminate in helping students achieve their capacity to be smarter, wiser, and in changing the world for good. And finally, I want to talk about this last part of the curriculum change as a model of dignified dialogue and mutual respect. There is a 400-level course where this curriculum culminates. It's a peacemaking course. This was designed to take all the honest learning and knowledge that comes from being a student in our curriculum and applies it to encountering honest differences of opinion in the world. With the full knowledge that we would be attempting to implement a peacemaking culmination of our curriculum, I made our campus-wide devotionals and forums last semester focus on bridging divides, peacemaking, and being voices of moderation, or in President Oakes' words, on contested matters, we should seek to moderate and unify, and I wish we had that in t-shirts everywhere. One of the forums was given by David Blankenhorn, the president and co-founder of Braver Angels. Braver Angels, as many of you are aware, was established in 2018 to address the challenge of growing partisan animosity and is the crisis of our time and threatens our nation, and our friend Jefferson is here from Braver Angels today. I had attended a Braver Angels convention the previous summer in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and immediately felt we needed to collaborate with this excellent group. In that forum that David Blankenhorn gave, he vowed to work closely with SVU on our proposed peacemaking course to help increase the practice of civil debates on campus and to support the identity of the school to be a place where religion and values can inform the structure of increased civility among differences. So needless to say, 10 of our students next week and 2 of our faculty members are attending and workshopping at the Braver Angels Convention in Kenosha, Wisconsin. They will be piloting our Peacemaking 400 level course in the fall. We are going to be holding Braver Angels debates with other local universities, including Virginia Military Institute and Washington and Lee University. Just like this was an event last spring, our Braver Angels event. That's David Blankenhorn on the side at that event, not the day before his forum at our school. Our collaboration with Braver Angels in this 400-level peacemaking course will also include support and guests from the Wheatley Institute as we make peacemaking the culmination of our educational program. I'd like to conclude with a quick recap of how we are trying to operate as peacemaking entities through our mission and curriculum. So let's go back to this slide. This is alarming to me. And I don't think religiosity has any reason to go down in that era of someone's life. So the way I've thought about this is I would like to keep religiosity at the high level that they leave high school with, and even increase it. But for the time being, I'm going to try to maintain it. And at our university, we're going to scaffold that religiosity, allow political and civic engagement to rise with the scaffolding so that our core curriculum, I didn't talk about our partnership with the Institute, which is our religious education, our campus life and classroom pedagogy, which Jeremiah John will talk about, our participation in sports and sportsmanship, and our Christ-centered environment scaffolds this ultimate 400-level peacemaking course to send off people to the world to manage those honest differences of opinion with dignified dialogue and mutual respect. And I can't wait to get going on this. We've already doing it. We're going to do it even more next year. I'm going to turn some time over to Jeremiah John, Dr. Jeremiah John, to talk about campus life and how we can do this in the university setting. Thanks.
I'm grateful to be here today as a professor of political science. I'm entering my 18th year at Southern Virginia University. I've been in a few different roles at the university, and I'm really grateful to be able to talk about religious freedom, civility, and peacemaking in the context of that community and reflecting on my experience in that community. The 21st century psychologist John Bowlby, who pioneered attachment theory in the study of child development, wrote, "Life is best organized as a series of daring ventures from a secure base." In his context, he meant that children should face many kinds of challenges and even frustrations, but only after they've established a base of physical security and a feeling of subjective safety, primarily through their relationship with their parents. In this safety, they know that they can try and fail without that failure being catastrophic. They can accept defeat knowing that they will be allowed to try again. In higher education, I think the parties to the debates over whether the rising generation is okay tend to latch onto one side of this equation, either the daring ventures or the secure base. One chorus joins writers like Jonathan Haidt, who warn against the lack of challenge, discomfort, and independence in the lives of young people today, as compared to previous generations. Another chorus points to the economic and social uncertainties of the world that young people are entering, asking us to see things from the perspective of young adults who are not all coming from the safe world of the older generation that may sometimes scold them. Young people themselves, at least those in college, seem to lean more with the latter camp, telling us that their base is not secure enough. In a 2023 survey of undergrads commissioned by the Buckley Institute, nearly half of respondents agreed that it's sometimes appropriate to shout down or disrupt campus speakers. And about the same proportion agreed that fellow students who've made an insensitive remark should be given mandatory training. As we have seen, however, the push for greater safety can increase hostility and mistrust and may create insecurity itself. In the same survey, 45%, an amazing percentage, said violence may be justified from preventing someone from expressing hateful views. And 48% said they would not bring themselves to be friends with someone who affiliates with a different political party. 3 in 5 say they are intimidated from sharing their own views in campus life. There are some attitudes, I think, that we need merely to describe to see the problems, to critique them. And I guess, at least for me, one of these views is saying I could never be friends with someone who votes for so-and-so or is pro-choice or pro-life, or who puts an Israeli flag or a Palestinian flag in their social media bio. But these views do seem to be common, especially among young people. So common that I believe we need to engage with them and understand the underlying desire for safety and security that they express. The journalist Monica Guzman, many of you may have heard of her recent book, has recently written about political and cultural polarization. She's written, "Whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination. When we decide we could never be friends with this person or that person because of the way they think, it's often because we formed an opinion about them before we know them." Young people whose relationships are mediated by technology, have been limited by social isolation, and who have many adults warning them about the bad people, the enemies, the people they should watch out for among their fellow citizens. In our world, especially that of young people, practically everyone may be underrepresented in our own lives. Campus life does hold out a remedy for this isolation, mistrust, and division. Students get to venture outside their hometown social spheres. They get to move away from family. In the case of Southern Virginia, may be very far away from family if they're from the West. College is a rite of passage that can cause people to accept a greater level of challenge and discomfort than they normally would. But American colleges have also followed prevailing trends of decreasing independence and rising social isolation. Social events are increasingly regulated by campus authorities. Instruction is increasingly online, or delivered by short-term faculty, or at least mediated by learning management software rather than in-person contact and conversation. The relationship between students and their institutions is increasingly bureaucratic. There are more services than ever, but a smaller number of human interactions with someone who actually knows something about the student. In general, colleges and universities do say they want belonging, connection, and relationship building. Deficits in these areas show up in research on retention. But many are moving in the opposite direction. Marketing and competition for students is focused on individual outcomes primarily, and self-fulfillment and individual achievement is often given central place in campus initiatives. And yet, as we know from a host of research, one example is the book by Chambliss and Takich called How College Works. We know from this research that meaningful relationships are the basic prerequisites of learning. They are also the primary motivator for many students and the mechanism of the learning process. People learn from someone they know, they like, they respect, they know who cares about them. And in addition, for college graduates, these relationships with peers, teachers, and mentors are among the most valued results of the college experience, for many students on par or ranked more highly than the academic knowledge or even job skills. A sense of belonging, of being known and seen based on trusting relationships with peers and mentors, can enable the rising generation to step into uncomfortable conversations and listen to challenging points of view. This kind of environment is built by countless small interactions where people feel understood and valued. Allison Pugh, in her recent book, The Last Human Job, a wonderful title for a book today, called these interactions artisanal connective labor, the difficulty, admittedly risky, task of reaching across the borders of class, race, and religion, and overcoming the blind spots that sometimes exist between young people and those of us who guide, teach, and sometimes evaluate them. In today's institutions, we can sometimes retreat from the personal for fear of overstepping sensible, wise boundaries. But the colder the campus community, the less practiced we are at the work of building new connections, the less our students will be willing to step over the difficult lines of cultural conflict. For college faculty and campus leaders, what does it mean to do connective labor that supports civility? I think in the life of an instructor, I think it means willing to trade off some things that we really value and are good. A test, an assignment, a couple lectures, and trade them in for more connective work, one-on-one meetings, more student-teacher conferences and paper conferences. Being willing to not give up on the admittedly risky team projects and student-designed assignments, and asking for student input in the course of our classes. For campus leaders, I think it means developing strong measures of belonging and community to add to the assessments that we already do that are required of accreditors that are almost entirely focused on individual student success. I also believe that unity and belonging are built by common purpose. In the past several years, I've really been proud to share the simple motto for the code of conduct at SVU, that a knight is honest, faithful, and kind. All three of these are relational values that show us how to treat others and are high ideals that we can sometimes fall short of. But it's also important that these principles are based on a system of values, in our case, the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. That system helps us understand how standards of behavior are rooted in a love for God and in the dignity and divine worth of each human being. It also contains within it a reason for believing that not everything hangs upon our contemporary human disagreements and political conflicts. Since we know God is in command and has the human family in his hands, this fact allows us to accept defeat in a debate or in a political contest without losing hope or throwing away a friendship. The pluralistic landscape of religious colleges in the United States allows young people, those of religious faith, and I think for those who don't practice a religious faith, to see a spiritual framework in action that can allow them to transcend our contemporary culture of insecurity and hostility and set out on these daring ventures of understanding and peacemaking. Thank you.
Hello, I am Deidra Dryden and have had the opportunity to be involved in athletics at Southern Virginia University for well over 25 years now, and most recently I've been the director of athletics for 5 years. And what a great place of civility and peacemaking, right? Athletics. Athletics, we find ourselves at the nexus of, a lack of civility, direct competition, and then sportsmanship and peacemaking. And it is such an interesting space to be in. We are proud members of the NCAA Division III, and in NCAA Division III is quite different. It fits us very well because it places a huge emphasis on participation, which is part of why we wanted to share this with you today. We have well over 600 athletes and 29 varsity sports. So we get to make our decisions based on the participation of our student athletes. Another key piece is that sportsmanship is one of the key philosophies of Division III, which we also resonate with. And then something that's really different than the other divisions is that geographic proximity is part of the athletic conference you are in. So in other words, our competitors are our neighbors, and we love our neighbors. So we are, literally, some of them are right up the road, and we are proud members of the USA South Athletic Conference. And the geographic footprint allows for us to drive and compete with all of our neighbors. So in a meeting, as I was working with the other athletic directors from the other institutions, we had a discussion about, in a post-pandemic world, the lack of civility and fan behavior and some of the problems that were existing in collegiate athletics and athletics in general. And we took this very seriously at Southern Virginia, and we decided to focus on fan behavior with our student athletes. A knight is faithful, honest, and kind. We love one another. So we decided to address this team by team, and we brought them in team by team and wanted to discuss with them what behavior was appropriate as they attended events and watched their friends compete. Now, this got really testy. This got really, we made it a very open dialogue, and they were able to share what they thought was okay and what they had heard and what they had experienced, and we were able to share what was not okay, what would be acceptable. And as we had this really great, honest conversation, we got to bedrock, and here's where we got to bedrock. Certain things that can be yelled in a stadium of thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people in a group are so different when they are a piercing voice in an intimate athletic setting and when you are competing against your neighbors. And as we finally got to that bedrock piece, we were able to create a culture, and dare I say, improve upon a culture, because we didn't have as many major problems, but improve upon a culture that has become so magnificent and positive and great for fans, student athletes, and for our officials. And we had this really great byproduct of talking to our student athletes about fan behavior, and that is we ended up winning the Sportsmanship Award 3 years in a row just based on a conversation that started with fan behavior. And this award is voted upon by their fellow student athletes. They cannot vote for themselves. The administrators and the coaches have nothing to do with it. And then what's even better than that is, not better than that, also great, is that we won along the way. Not better. So as we won the Sportsmanship Award 3 years in a row, we also won the President's Cup 3 years in a row. And we're able to win more championships than the other universities and, who are our neighbors. So, as we find ourselves in this space of athletics where the lack of civility can be really daunting, I guess I'm just sharing with you that if we can do this in athletics, we can do it anywhere. So thank you. Go Knights.
No, you have to tell the story. This is such a good story. You have to hear.
So I'm an athletic director, and I'm nervous, if you didn't know that. So I just wanted to share also one of the results of this culture change. Happened. This is one picture, but this is a very common thing that happens at many of our competitions. Some of our schools that we compete against are faith-based, some are not. This was an instance where a student athlete was hurt. Both teams gathered around as that player was being taken off the field, and they prayed together. We have had opportunities where in our faith, a student athlete has received a priesthood blessing. Both teams have gathered around and to provide privacy. So it has created this camaraderie, this sportsmanship, and this very civil competition, even though we are fierce competitors. So thank you for letting me add that on. Thank you.
So good. Just to recap really quick, peacemaking isn't something we naturally come about. And our young adults don't naturally, if you say, just be a peacemaker, it's not going to naturally happen. So hopefully, as you've heard from each one of them, you realize that there was a process that we have to go through. So to make this art part of you, you've got to have some resources. You've got to have something that helps you move it forward to the next step. A dear friend of mine was talking to some of a class of young adults, and she threw up a case study, and it was a simple case study. And so here it is. You have a Muslim friend at work who finds a private place to pray during his break. Several coworkers begin mocking his practice. One coworker finally says he should just keep his religion to himself and not practice it at work. He then turns to you and says, "What do you think?" Now, fascinating, as you sit in a class or even in a group of all of us, what would you say? What would you think? How would you respond? She said it was fascinating to see these young adults and their initial response was either criticizing the coworker, defending the coworker, just kind of apathy. They did not know what to do with this and not moving anything forward. There were walls that went up. So when we think of peacemaking in the classroom, on the court, wherever these people are at, they've got to practice. And so that's what we're going to do. So what she had given us, which I loved, she loaded their lips with just phrases or questions that could help the dialogue. And these questions, simple one, I'll just read one. I think I see it a little differently. Would it be okay if I shared my perspective? We can have differences and still be friends. Comments that would help load their lips so that they can learn how to be a peacemaker. I ran into 3 students that were helping us, some of the volunteers, and I said, how do we help young adults be peacemakers? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, I don't know either, so what do we do? And he said, we just don't see how that's to be done. We don't see it modeled. And so I think here at Southern Virginia University this next year, that is our goal, is to practice, to help people see what they can be and how they can continue dialogue that becomes meaningful. What will happen? Relationships increase. And all of a sudden, things change. So in our lives, how are you personally going to increase the capacity of the rising generation? How can you give them the resources that they need so that we can become a peaceful people that can sit and have dialogue without shutting someone down? At Southern Virginia University, no one's canceled. We don't have that culture. Let's pull that up, and I'll let you read it, but let's go ahead and take some questions. Turn it over to our moderator.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was an amazing discussion and panel. It's great to hear from all of you. Yeah, if we have any questions from the audience, I think we're going to have a mic running around, so just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you.
I'm just interested if you have set up anything like an internship or activities or events where you bring people together from different backgrounds and different perspectives to, do you have any like partnerships with other schools?
We actually, fortunately, have that built in our athletic conference. We have a group of students that come from each university and all different, faiths, and many of them are other faiths, and so they come together on a semi-annual basis and discuss the needs and sportsmanship and things like that. So that's a little, maybe not international students of any sort, but certainly from the region and other faiths through athletics.
That's a great question, and everyone could actually handle it better than I. But I have been impressed in the short time that I've been at Southern Virginia that what they're doing is they're bringing in, like James was telling us, that we brought in Washington and Lee, which is a school that's right next to us, VMI, and we're having discussions and dialogues. Braver Angels helped us with that. But in our forums, we're very intentional about who comes to speak so that there's a broad group of perspectives. We've brought in congresswomen and congressmen so that they can see in the political process what does that look like, and they can actually be with them. They might see things completely different, but understand you can have a civil conversation about even political things, because it's important for them to be in that process.
this is very brief, and your story reminded me of something. Before I came to Southern Virginia University in the mid-2010s, I was overseas at the American University of Kuwait. And I was a Christian working at a predominantly Muslim institution. And so we had lots of discussions, and I remember the prayers. And what would happen with our class is that, with my class, is that students would show up late, and they'd say, well, I was just doing my prayers. And, these 5 times a day, and I don't know when they are. And, I mean, I guess I'd sometimes hear the call or whatever. And so I'd say, okay. And then we'd start class late. And I think of the scenario that you gave about, someone leaving work to go pray, and you go, okay, well, that's not work being done. And I would say, well, we're starting class late, and what's going on here? And I was not I was a guest in their religious culture. Finally, what I decided to do is at the beginning of class, I'd say, hey, is everybody prayed up? Because if you are, we can start class. If not, can we take about the next 5 or 6 minutes to go over to the little room? There were several rooms in the university where you could go do your prayers. I'm like, could everyone go do their prayers really quick? I'll say a little prayer of my own in the classroom. And sometimes they take that up. Most of the time they didn't. But what they did notice is that I was very aware of their culture, making room for it, and also not allowing it to be lax. I felt it was getting a little lax. Someone would come in 25 minutes late, and I was doing my prayers, and I was like, oh man, those were long this time. But anyway,
sweet hour of prayer.
Yeah. So for some reason, your question made me think of that. But we've even collaborated with the Institute. They would like to provide, because we said 80% LDS, they would like to provide a class for those who are not members of the church to have a dialogue about a Christ-centered environment, things like that. So.
I think most colleges have some work to do on some of these areas. In terms of bringing speakers with different points of view, I think a lot of them are doing well. Some of the problems I see is when a speaker's students see it as representing the administration or people they don't know. And I think it does help us as mentors and faculty who know them, who encourage students to go listen to a speaker. Say, I bet this speaker has a really interesting point of view on a question that we've been talking about. I don't know if you'll agree, but I encourage you to go because I think they have an interesting thing to say. I mean, I think we are careful about our speakers, the way they make their arguments. I don't think we're trying to get a group of homogenous speakers that all have the same points of view, but the way that they present their views in a friendly way, I think that is important to us. And then us as people who know them personally can encourage them to engage with those views. As they said, we live in an area with 2 other colleges, and so we have the opportunities for our students to go to those other colleges and hear speakers and go to events there, and we welcome those other students at our campus. So those are a few things that we've done in addition to what's been said.
Thank you, yeah. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, so my name is John, and I'm actually from a university where cultural differences do exist. I have a question about the dialogue thing mentioned by President Nelson. How can we explain dignified dialogue in a venue where cultural differences varies depending on how do they explain dignified dialogue? I'm from BYU Hawaii, so basically people from different countries have their own definitions and perspectives of what is dignified dialogue.
I would ask you what your perspective of dignified dialogue is. That would be interesting.
Sure. So, well, as a Filipino, dignified dialogue is, you know when to speak and when to listen. So basically, when someone is speaking, you need to understand them, comprehend them before responding. So I feel like most of the contentions that usually happens in a cultural, diverse scenario happen. It's because a lot of students have different perspective on such issue, something like that.
I love that you added the ability to listen, to learn. Sometimes we listen or we hear, but I think peacemaking is listening to learn. Why do they see it differently? And even though we may not agree, you might understand a little bit more about where they're coming from. So I loved what you said on that. And that is part of that dignified, dialogue that we're trying to have.
I'm going to reread Doctrine and Covenants 88:118, just part of it. Let one speak at a time, and let all listen unto his or her sayings, that when all have spoken, that all may be edified of all, and that every man may have equal privilege. My sense is that encompasses many, maybe not all, but many different cultural differences when it comes to dignified dialogue. Listen, allow, and all may be edified. That seems to be a great model.
One thing that came to mind is that we do have some student groups on campus that I think are really helpful. A couple examples, the Black Student Union and Polynesian Heritage Club, that really help those students to get together to articulate their experience, and it also allows us, a larger group to listen to. But we do have some students, we may only have a couple Muslim students at a time on campus, and I think that's where the people who know those students best and have a good relationship with them can reach out and make an extra effort to say, what is your experience? I mean, how has it been, and how has this culture and environment been for you? And so being aware of those people who may not have the support and help to articulate their experience, and because it may be quite a burden to explain to everybody at a campus what Islam is like and what it's like to be a Muslim. That's something we just need to be aware of, and connect with, help them connect with people that they trust and have a relationship with.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Do you have plans to make the curriculum for peace building available to those outside of the school? And
I just did, unfortunately.
What advice do you have for organizations that are interested in also creating peace building curriculum? I'm not sure how to strike a balance between wanting to mooch off of other organizations and say, hey, you've done all the heavy lifting, can I piggyback off of that? Versus respecting the proprietary nature of all of the effort that went into that. And so trying to figure out how to scale up to a curriculum that would be impactful, taking advantage of the wisdom that you guys have accumulated while putting it together, but also maintaining a healthy boundary between what's yours and what will become ours.
It's such a good question. It's like a pitch right down the middle. And in part because we have a representative from Braver Angels at this conference. Braver Angels is an amazing organization. It's like they don't believe in plagiarism. They're like, take our stuff and use it because it'll be for the better, for the greater good. I'll just add, on my part, schools borrow from each other all the time. I thought our last presentation, if you were able to hear Ryan Burge, my sense is there are churches that allow a safe space for difference, and there are universities that should allow a safe space for difference, and curriculum should allow a broad base of knowledge so that you can have honest differences of opinion. And if that's the goal, I would share whatever kind of wisdom we would have with anyone who asked, in part because, as we can see, it's urgent. I think it's extremely urgent, and proprietary curriculum is not something that I would care about when the culture is urgently needing some peacemaking measures. That would be my sense. So.
I think it's a good idea, though, to maybe have some public-facing aspect of it on our website. Maybe as we present this, we could have some suggested readings. It's kind of an idea, I feel like, he's presenting us that we didn't necessarily have. So thank you for that idea. I would add some things. There are some things that have influenced us. We've looked to a few different religious traditions, but especially the Latter-day Saint tradition. And one author that has written on this, Peacemaking in the Latter-day Saint tradition, I think that's the title of his book, is Patrick Mason at Utah State, who's the chair of Mormon Studies. And also a Latter-day Saint scholar who was at BYU Hawaii, Chad Ford, wrote a book called Dangerous Love that I really love, actually, and it's not quite from a religious perspective, but it's a lot about healing personal relationships and also finding ways to resolve conflict. So Chad Ford and Patrick Mason, those are two people we've drawn on, and I think we even consulted a little bit with Patrick on this project. So those are a couple LDS scholars that I'd recommend.
Okay, we just have a few more minutes left. I just actually have a question that I would like to ask. So I love what you've been talking about this concept of honest disagreement and honest dialogue. What would be your advice for, obviously it's a lot easier to engage in this honest dialogue when it's mirrored back to you, when the other person is willing to kind of engage in that honest dialogue. So what would be your advice for modeling civility and peacemaking when it's not necessarily, when the other person you're talking to, other groups aren't necessarily with that same mindset?
President Cordon highlighted the word manage in that quote from President Nelson, "The peacemakers needed." Manage honest differences of opinion with dignified dialogue and mutual respect. She could probably say more about it than I could, but highlighting that, I think, is sort of getting to an answer to your question, where it's not necessarily just acknowledging, it's managing that situation is a true peacemaker. Is it? I hope I'm...
Well, and also wisdom, to be wise. Sometimes we don't. I'm always intrigued with the Savior's response. How was he a peacemaker? Sometimes he said nothing. And sometimes he walked away. And sometimes he turned over tables. Now, hopefully we're never turning over tables. But one of my favorite people if you've had a chance to ever read the Book of Mormon, if you haven't, it's a great read, was Captain Moroni. He's just such a powerful, passionate soul for freedom. But even his letter to Pehoran, probably anger overtook him, and he forgot to pause before he hit the send button. Because he put things in there that was not peacemaking. Passionate, righteous indignation, passionate plea has to be managed so that we can then turn around and communicate our views and what we're doing without attacking another person. Peacemaking needs to be void of attacking the person.
I guess in addition to what's been said, I would add, there's so many times when it's helpful to remind myself that a college is a place of learning. And when a student doesn't maybe live up to the model of civility, they deserve another chance to try again and have someone who cares about them, maybe give them some advice or nudge them in one direction or another. And they certainly deserve good models. Maybe we'll fall short occasionally too, but we should model and then articulate standards of civility, peacemaking on campus and teach them how to do it. But also be tolerant enough to allow people to have a second and third and fourth chance if they didn't get it right the first time. I don't think we shouldn't have rigid boundaries about civility so that we're excluding people for that reason as well. So a college as a place of learning means that young people especially can make mistakes and do better.
I was just going to add that as a faith-based universities, I was able to attend the Common Ground Initiative with the NCAA along with BYU, and something that we learned there that I found helpful is to understand the many identities that the individual you're talking with has, and to ask and find out what those identities are, and then also to be willing to intervene when we are witnessing a lack of empathy, not necessarily taking a stand on a position, but just to intervene when we are witnessing a lack of empathy or lack of civility.
Thank you. I love that. Oh, did you have one more comment? Or okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you to our panelists. This was a great discussion. I learned a lot. I think, coming from, I come from a legal background, and it's often the case where it's a very antagonist environment, and it's all about winning and losing. And I think sometimes religious freedom has that mindset as well, as we want to win court battles or win in the political sphere. But it's really refreshing to hear about how I think a lot of the change is going to happen on the cultural and social level in our daily interactions with people in centers of learning, colleges, universities. So thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists, and thank you everyone for being here.